Welcome to the Advantage Podcast, a monthly unscripted conversation with host David Ashcraft and top leaders impacting our world. Created by pastors for pastors to strengthen our leadership and expand our knowledge and influence.
Hey, well, welcome everybody, and it's so good to have a friend of mine, a fellow pastor from the Dallas, Texas area, actually, Jeff Jones. And so, Jeff, real good to have you here with us, and thank you for taking time to meet with the pastors that are part of the Advantage and just trying to make a difference across the state of Pennsylvania.
I love it. Thank you, Dave. It's always good to talk to you. And I have some family in the North Philly, South Jersey area, so they're not church, so I'm always for whatever I can do to help reach people like my family.
Oh, very good. Yeah. So when you say north of Philly, where are you, or where are they? Do you even know?
I don't even know, honestly. I know the ones that I know for sure kind of are in South Jersey, so south of Atlantic City, kind of between there and Philly somewhere is where they all are. So yeah.
Very good. Well, cool. Well, first of all, why don't we start with you just telling a little bit about yourself? I mean, I see two things on your wall behind you. You've got the state of Texas, which that's important, but you also have the state of Alabama. And so maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, how you even got into ministry, and then we'll talk specifically about your church.
Sure. So yeah, I grew up in Alabama, so that's the first one there in Huntsville, Alabama, and then moved to Texas when I came to go to seminary. But I grew up in a non-church family and became a Christian in high school and kind of jumped in with both feet. But it definitely gave me a passion to do whatever I could to help churches help reach people like my family, because they were very smart, very well educated. And a lot of the straw men that people use to talk about these non-believers and what they think, well, that was my family that I loved, and thinking they don't think like that. They're not that silly. They're not that, Yeah. So coming out to seminary and all that was, as much as anything, a desire to really build church, do whatever I could to build a church that can reach people who don't go to church. And that's still my commitment today.
If I remember, Jeff, I remember you telling some stories of maybe this was before seminary. You were involved in student ministry and even some, I don't know if they were called mission trips, but trips that you took. Was it to Chicago or other places in the group? And maybe being naive to the big city. Is that the way you describe it? Or just some surprises there?
So that story is I took over a pretty large youth ministry when I was 18. I had no business doing it. The church was going through a lot of turmoil. And our youth pastor left to go to Wheaton Bible Church, actually, to be the youth pastor there in Chicago. And we did these 2-week mission trips in inner city Chicago with a group called Inner City Impact. And so we would take, 60 or 70 kids there, and for those 2 weeks. And in between, you'd go to church. And so the one thing my pastor, the church I grew up in became a Christian in, was a very traditional Bible church, not that engaged in outreach or evangelism or community engagement or anything. And again, I'm from a non-church family. So the pastor told me, senior pastor said, hey, you can go anywhere you want. Just don't go to Willow Creek Community Church, because they're built around people who don't go to church. And in his mind, they were compromising things to do that. And the way he described it, though, was so intriguing to me that I thought, well, I didn't tell him, but I was like, that's where we're going to go. So we went to Willow Creek, and it blew me away. They were doing a baptism service, or all these hundreds of people being baptized, sharing their stories about how they came to Christ. It was the first time I had a vision for a church that could reach people like my family. And it was so impactful to me. And I got in a little bit of trouble, but it was worth it to just to see that and experience it. So that's the Chicago story.
So went to Dallas Seminary, graduated from Dallas, and did you go right away to what was then Fellowship Bible Church?
I did. So a friend of mine that I went to college with in Alabama was on staff at Fellowship Bible Church North in Plano, Texas. And so right away, there was an internship slot open. So literally the day I drove in on a Wednesday in a U-Haul, got in about 6:30 at night, got in our car and drove up to a youth gathering that evening. So started right away at Fellowship Bible Church. I never had to do the church shopping thing in my life, which I'm thankful for.
So really, that's the only church you've been in your entire career, is that correct?
That one and the Alabama one, yeah.
That's amazing.
But in terms of, that's true.
So how many years would that be that you've been at Fellowship now?
It's 35 years almost. So it was in 1989,
Yeah,
and
that's
I
great.
was an intern, came on staff after I graduated.
So Fellowship has a great history, and had the pastor that you followed,
Yeah.
definitely very influential for sure in the Dallas area, but I would say across the United States as well. Gene Getz, and so describe a little bit, like how long ago did you follow Gene, and maybe describe what it was like following somebody like Gene Getz, and you might even tell a little bit more about Gene as well.
Yeah. So Gene, was a professor at Dallas Seminary, and in the 60s and early 70s, uh, wrote a book called The Sharpening Focus of the Church, and wrote a bunch of other books too, 50 books or something. But it was very influential in helping churches think about, hey, as cultures changed, churches really hadn't in the 60s going into the 70s. And how can we rethink the way we do church to be relevant to a changing culture? And out of that came a movement of fellowship Bible churches. There's about 400 or 500 of those around the country.
Amazing. Yeah.
And yeah, and so it's about 15 of them here in the Dallas area. And so he wrote Measure of a Man and other books that sold a whole lot of copies. And so that was 20 years ago. We passed the baton. So I was on his staff, and then a little over 20
And
years.
Jeff, let me just say, it would be interesting to know what Gene would have done during the multi-site era, because I mean, in some ways, he preceded that and really almost in some ways started the multi-site movement before it became what it is today. But would have been interesting to see that. But anyway, go on. You then
Yeah,
stepped into the role of pastor following Gene, which was stepping into some big shoes.
it was, and so it was one of the first big succession stories, because it was 20 years ago. Now they're
Yeah.
more common. And so it was intimidating for sure, thinking of stepping into those shoes. I mean, at the point, God really, it's a long story, but used this church to re-illusion me in the concept of church. And so I told Gene, hey, look, if it's, when he asked me 3 years before that, if I would do the succession process. And I said, Gene, if the way to progress the vision of this place is to wash the windows, I'm in. If it's to be the next lead pastor, I'm in. You tell me. Either way is fine. And I still believe that. And but I had people around the country I didn't know. I mean, calling me and writing me, wanting to do magazine articles on the succession. Because again, it was one of the first larger church stories about succession. And everybody was telling me, oh man, you don't want to be you. You want to be the guy who follows you don't want to be the guy who follows the guy. You want to be the guy who follows the guy who follows the guy.
Yeah,
And so they would say, you're the sacrificial lamb. How does that feel? I was like, well,
exactly.
thank you for the phone call. I appreciate it. I appreciate your encouragement.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, the gift of discouragement, I think, in that time frame. And but we had Gene did a really great job passing the baton, and it's fueled in me a desire. I mean, now I'm closer to passing the baton myself in the next years, and I've come to I think a succession process done well. I mean, we quickly doubled the size of our church and then tripled the size of our church. I don't think you have to assume it's going to not go well. I think you should assume it will. And if Gene, I really want to honor him because it's not easy to pass the baton. Same way with you. You've done such a great job at LCBC. And if you do it right, then the person leaves, sort of passes the baton while still sprinting in ministry.
Exactly.
And the person receiving it, is able to sprint. And they are able to see the current thing as a platform for future growth in ministry, not as an ending place, not as something to protect or to preserve, but just a starting place to grow from there. And so it's been I'm very thankful for the journey. Not that it was all easy and all rosy and all that. There were trickiness and difficulty, but it went well. And largely that's because Gene did a good job handing the baton well.
Yeah, that's great. And Jeff, what I've said from my standpoint, the surprise to me wasn't the mechanics of my handing the baton to Jason or Jason taking the baton from me. I think what causes us so often to drop the baton and the surprising element were the emotions that I felt as the outgoing guy. and as I talked to Jason, the emotions he felt as the incoming guy,
Yeah.
and just somehow managing those
Yeah.
internal feelings to not mess up and drop the baton and kind of blow the whole thing up. So I'm sure you had to live through those as
Oh,
well.
yeah. And there's a lot of temptations along the way for both the incoming and outgoing pastor, and people will pull on you all kinds of directions you should not go.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, there's a lot there, as you know. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, way to go for doing well. Gene is still alive and active. I think I told you I saw him Ocean City, New Jersey. We go to from Pennsylvania, and
Yes.
he was actually speaking at Ocean City Tabernacle last summer, so was able to stop and talk to him while we were there. I think he's back again this year, as far as I know. So
Yeah, he is 92 and going strong, and has a
yeah,
10-year plan,
is
for
he
his
really?
ministry. So I love it. It's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. That's great. Hey, well, that's not the reason why I wanted our advantage pastors to hear from you, even though those are great things. What I really wanted to talk with you about, Jeff, is you have written a book recently that I found to be exceptional and very helpful for pastors. And I know the subtitle is something effective. What is it? Rebranding Christianity, the world's most important brand, or something of that nature.
Yeah.
But maybe describe before you talk about. Well, you can correct me on the name of the book, so do that.
Sure. Yeah.
But then I would love to kind of hear from you. How did you even get into the topic of rebranding Christianity? Why do you think there's even a need for it? And describe a little bit of your journey there.
Well, you got the title right. It's Rebranding Christianity. The subtitle is When the World's Most Important Brand Loses Its Way.
That's what it was, which I love the subtitle. I think that's a
Yeah.
great one, because I think we have lost our way. Feels like it in a lot of ways. So, how did you even start down that road, that journey? What were some of the impetuses to you moving in that direction?
Yeah, it really started with a desire here in Dallas. We're a church built around reaching people who don't go to church. And increasingly, that's a very skeptical demographic, even in a place like Dallas, because we have people moving in from everywhere. And a lot of de-churched people, and people burned with church, and and people who've never been church have a very negative reputation of Christianity, very perspective of Christianity, the opposite of what Jesus said our brand is.
Yeah,
And so I think just saying, okay, how do we change the perception of Christianity of non-believing people in our own community? And so I ended up engaging he was in charge of marketing for Frito-Lay in our church, a marketing executive, who then put me in touch with a branding executive who's a non-believing person, who's considered one of the top 1 or 2 branding experts in the country, to come and have him meet with us. And I remember that guy's name is Dwight. And so I was talking with Mike and Dwight about, hey, how can we do that? And Dwight, as a non-believer, was really interesting, because he was very cold to that conversation. He loves Mike, but cold to me and and then he said, well, I'll see if it's a good fit. And then a couple months later, he came back and said, hey, I want to meet with you. And he said, if you noticed I was sort of cold and non-committal, it's honestly because what I was thinking as you were talking, to help you change the perception of Christianity and change the brand of Christianity in your area, I was thinking there's no way I'm ever going to work with you, because he said, I know how to give influence to people. And if I give influence to the wrong people, I consider that immoral. I'm making the world worse.
yeah, interesting.
And so it'd be immoral to work with you.
Interesting. So obviously he had negative notions or
Absolutely.
ideas about the church. So just real fast, nutshell, and I think all of them are fairly obvious, but what kind of things did you guys see that was wrong with the brand of Christianity?
Yeah. So, and he vetted organization and said, man, I had no idea that there was a version of Christianity like you. I've got to work with you. And he's the one that suggested we think nationwide, not just Dallas. And that eventuated the book. And Dwight helped write the book. So it's a cool
Yeah,
story. But yeah, so when we don't have to guess what people think of when they think of Christianity, because we have all these polls. In fact, if you want to get really depressed, like let's say you're having a good day and you want to ruin it, all you got to do is go online and Google millennials and Christianity, Gen Z and Christianity, and you'll see how people, especially in those generations, view Christianity. And the brand, Jesus gave it. We're not talking about coming up with something new. We're talking about going back to something very old, 2,000-year-old brand, as Jesus gave it, which is, this is the way people will know you're my followers if you love people the way I love you. That's it.
okay.
That's the way people should think of us. That and I believe it's that kind of love that the world will find irresistible as it did 2,000 years ago.
So
But
obviously, people aren't finding us to be irresistible.
right, yes.
So, are the things that you found that are causing us to be irresistible? Are they new, or they've been around for 2,000 years?
The irresistible things have been around 2,000 years. The early church modeled that really well. They won over a skeptical pre-Christian world, and through love display, the kind of communities the first diverse community ever, as far as we know, sociologically, was the early church in our very stratified, polarized Roman world like we live in. The love displayed through charity and through doing good works in a Roman culture that did not value that. The generosity that they had, how they came around pandemics and the sick, and there's a lot there, right? It's everything the New Testament tells us to do to engage. As Christians were engaged culture with their truth claims in a very wise way, in a very humble way, in a very gentle way, in a polarized world. All those things they did super well, and so it's really
Jeff,
the same things now.
So Jeff, for somebody might say, well, their culture is very different than ours. We're much more difficult culture to engage with in those ways. Can you give us a nutshell of what the culture was in those days in the early church? And is it that different than it is today?
Yeah, so the early church world, there's commonalities and differences because they were a pre-Christian culture and now we're a post-Christian culture. So there are similarities and differences. So in a pre-Christian culture that they lived in, Christianity was unknown, but it was very foreign. And so, and therefore easily misrepresented. And, Rome was very threatened by Christianity. So there was a whole misinformation campaign from the Caesars and from Roman religion, pagan religion, against Christianity that, we were cannibalistic because of communion, that we were incestuous because we call other brothers and sisters, that we were atheists because we didn't bow down and worship the Roman pantheon or Caesars and all that, that we were disruptive to Roman civil culture and all that, which Christianity was actually, because, wouldn't bow down and honor the emperor, that kind of thing. So it was, they had a lot against them, a lot of skepticism and a lot of bad press that they had to deal with, that they then had to win over by doing exactly what Jesus said, love displayed in radical ways. In a post-Christian culture, it's a little different because in a post-Christian culture, people feel like they know who we are and they've moved on from us. And so in some ways that's more difficult because it's like we've tasted you and we don't like what we tasted, because all the words, you would guess were seen as arrogant and mean and pushy and judgmental and political and all that stuff, the way people see Christianity, which is the opposite of who we should be. So we've now have a skeptical culture that thinks they know what we're about. And the good news, though, is that's not what we're about. So they can be easily pleasantly surprised.
Unfortunately, we've done a lot of things to reinforce their wrong views about us, right? So
yes, we have. So we have lost trust, and now we've got to regain trust. And I think we got to be really honest about that. So we used some branding stories. Mike and Dwight, those marketing people, wrote case studies alongside my part of the book, which was more the biblical, practical part of the book. But they did these case studies of brands that had lost trust with their customer and regained it. And one of those was Domino's Pizza. And I think we can learn from them because Domino's had really shrunk in their market share and certainly reputation. They were known for just really fast pizza, but really bad pizza. So if you wanted really bad pizza fast, Domino's was your pizza. And they didn't want to be known for that. And they were tanking as a company. And so they decided to not just do a flashy campaign that said, oh, no, we're new and improved, trust us, and stick with their product. Instead, they decided to just get really honest. Hey, if we've got a product problem, let's be honest about that. And so they went back to the drawing board. They listened to their customers and they changed the way they made their pizza. They changed the way their ingredients were. They changed the way they made them. They went back to the drawing board. And then their marketing campaign was just frank honesty. They hired real customers to say real things that like, and you may remember this. This is what, 20 years ago or whatever, but they said, customers would say things like, Domino's pizza is worse than the cardboard box it comes in. That's their marketing campaign, but then they said, but hey, we understand that, but that's not who we want to be. And that's not who we are anymore. And we don't even trust you to buy the pizza. We'll give you a free pizza to try it. And in their market share in that 2000 to, I think it was 2005 to 2015, whenever that period was after that, their market share more than doubled. Their stock price went from $3 to over $350 today.
Wow.
More than Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, all those.
Domino's Pizza. Who would have thought? That's amazing.
I know, but they were honest with their customer to say, hey, we are not who we want to be, and we're sorry. And that's not who we're going to be anymore. And I think American Christianity is there, to say, hey, we have not been who we want to be. We've gotten sidetracked with all kinds of things, politicizing our faith. There's lots of, fear rather than love. There's all kinds of ways we've gotten sidetracked, and we're sorry.
So Jeff, it's one thing to say that. It's hard to do it. I'm always fascinated. It feels like every generation comes along and they'll say the number one thing to reaching this generation is authenticity.
Yeah.
And so, we hear it, and every generation has wanted authenticity, and we know we're supposed to be authentic, but it's hard for us, for some reason, to say, oh man, we haven't been, our pizza is terrible. It tastes like the box that it's served in. Or to say that about the church, it's hard for us to admit that. So have you figured out ways to do that? Or is it truly that difficult? Just say it is. How have you landed on doing that?
Yeah, so we have said it in different ways, and then we've doubled down on the brand, which is radical love. And so, we've done a couple things. One of the things that we've done, and we've used media to help us with this, because Jesus said, do your good work, be light, do good works in a way that when people see your good works, they glorify your Father in heaven. So it's good works that people can see that then causes people who don't know God to glorify God. So we've tried to double down on our brand in our community and in the most out there ways possible. So we've thought about, okay, what are ways that, like, who are the people who least expect us to love them? Well, the LGBTQ plus community, for example. So we did this blitz with the AIDS Association of Dallas, which are people in the last stages of HIV/AIDS. And because we were trying to show unexpected love in unexpected places. We've done other things in the gay community, and you've heard of churches doing things at gay parades and things like that, just demonstrating love. And we have a conservative view of sexuality and marriage, so it's not that.
So
but how do we
compromising your views on what Scripture says?
But a very liberal view of love and acceptance, just like Jesus said, right? It's a wide welcome to a narrow path. And so, but our local press caught that. And
you got some negative repercussions from the church world, right? But did you get positive views from the non-church world?
We did. And what we've learned from the non-church world is their expectations are so low that if you're just reasonably nice people as Christians, you will shock them. And it does not take much, to do that. And we did a thing too, we paying bail for single moms with nonviolent first-time offenders, was another thing. Well, that got out there. That got political too. We didn't make it political.
What kind of press did you get? You said the press got wind of it. So what kind of
positive secular press? We did get some, we're in Dallas, Texas. So we're in the buckle of the Bible Belt. And so I am suspect by a lot of the far right Christians in our own community.
Which is so funny because theologically you're pretty far right as it is.
I know. And so and we're a church that tries to skirt above politics. So we're a multi-ethnic church. So we run the political gamut, but in Dallas, Dallas Christianity, white Dallas Christianity, evangelicalism tends to be very right-wing oriented and conflate, which I think is damaging when you conflate that. I think it's one of the problems we have in Christianity that's caused the backlash that we're experiencing. And so overall, it was
Have
extremely
you
tough.
been able to reason at all with people that have been opposed to you, Christians, or is it almost impossible to try to reason? You just have to do what you do.
Yeah, no, the book, Rebranding Christianity was really helpful because it is a strong argument for, people call it a middle position. I would call it an exalted position over left and right more than middle, because it's not
Yeah.
take a little bit of this, take a little bit of that, but it still feels middle. And most people are actually in the middle in our churches and in our communities. They're really not at either the far progressive extreme or the far conservative extreme.
Yeah.
And yet those are the only voices that are talking out there. And so the book was really helpful in giving voice to where we're coming from, because people could then galvanize around that to say, hey, that is what, I've never worded it that way, I didn't know how to word it that way, but that's really helpful. And so a
Yeah.
strong voice from the middle, I think, is really needed right now, and
Yeah.
people want it. And when they hear it, they resonate with it, because they really aren't at one of the extremes, most of them. I mean, 10%
Right.
on
Right.
either side are, so let's say, but 80% really aren't. But since those are the only voices out there, and people are not discipled well in these kind of issues, then they tend to, well, I guess that sounds right. It sounds a little bit weird, what these people are saying on this far right cable station or this far left cable station, but I guess I'll go with it. But then when they hear another perspective, they're like, oh yeah, that's right. That's better, and so we have, I mean, obviously we've had some backlash of people that have dug in on either side at the extreme, but most 80% of people have been really appreciative.
Yeah, good. So again, a great book to read, a great resource on how to. I like the fact that you're calling it, would you say, an exalted position as opposed to the middle position. Um, let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit, Jeff. In the last few minutes here, this is political season. We've got election coming up. The ads we're already getting bombarded with from both sides of the aisle. And so, what do you advocate? What can a pastor do right now to stay in that exalted position, not get drugged down into the muck that's going on and is going to be going on? And even describe, I didn't give you a chance to describe Chase Oaks now. You changed the name. Part of the things that you did as you came into the church is you changed the name. Maybe describe, because you guys are a big church. You've got 6, 7, 8 campuses now?
We have 5.
5 locations now. Okay.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. And so a large church and, like you said, a diverse population where you are there in North Dallas. And so how would you encourage our pastors to even exercise radical love or talk about it from the front, from the pulpit, in today's culture with what we're coming up with an election?
Yeah, I'll just apply it to navigating a difficult political season, and how do we as Christians, with the brand of Christianity that Jesus gave it, what unites us is Jesus,
Yeah.
not a political party or political candidate or political persuasion. And you could argue, it's one of the great things about the diversity of church, right? What unites us is Jesus, not a donkey or an elephant, but the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, right? And so I love, I think one thing we can talk a lot about right now, because it's such a biblical priority, pretty much every New Testament book is an argument for unity in the church. And in a divided world, we've got to fight to be a united church, but not united around, it's not uniformity. And to help people understand the difference, it's not everybody who thinks alike, politically or otherwise, it's unity of diverse people around Jesus. And I love what David Platt said. He's a pastor in DC. He said, what does not unite us should never be allowed to divide us. And politics is not what unites us. And so that should never be allowed to divide us. And so whenever we hear people saying, well, as a Christian, you could never vote Democrat, or as a Christian, you could never vote Republican. I understand there are reasons you could argue both ways on that, depending on which issue you talk about. But it's just such a false dichotomy and binary, and we need to attack that. That's satanic to me. It's him trying to disunify our churches. And so I think we have to fight really hard, like Paul said. We have to contend for the unity of the faith. And so we have to fight for it. And in a difficult political season, we have to remind people that our identity is not a country on this planet. It's certainly not a political party or political candidate. as Paul said, our citizenship is in, we're citizens of heaven, right? Our citizenship is in heaven, and we await a savior, he said in Philippians 3, from there. So our savior is not a political party or policy, it's a savior from there. And our identity, well, we're citizens of heaven. We're aliens in here. We're ambassadors to this country, not, our primary citizenship is not America, and our hope is not in a political party or persuasion. And so I think that that basic theological thing is something we've got to, I think we have to go there, and in our teaching, and certainly with our leaders.
So, Jeff, how would you respond to somebody that say, yeah, but it feels like you're copping out because we live here in the United States. There are a lot of things going on around us, and you're not addressing them. And what we'll hear is you're just staying in the middle. You're not addressing the topics. And so you're saying if you're going to address the topics, address the higher topics that unify us. Focus on Jesus. Focus the fact that this is not our home. But how do you address those that might say, yeah, but you're not really addressing the issues that are kind of boots on the ground for a lot of people right now?
Yeah, and I think it's good to address the issues too, but within a very clear perspective of our identity and mission. And the big problem now is that a lot of people think with their political filter before they think with their biblical filter. And so
what does that mean when you say that? Describe that a little bit.
Yeah, so if you're, let's say, issues of, it's why people would say you can't be a Democrat and be a Christian or whatever. You can't be a Republican, be a Christian. That's a political statement, not a biblical statement. And so how do we help people think of issues like race or life, abortion, and other kinds of life issues, cultural issues, cultural dynamics? Let's help people think biblically through that first and disciple people that way a little bit, which then a lot of times the political stuff is not so much the what, but the how. How do we engage issues of life? How do we engage the environment? How do we engage? Those tend to be more political. That's where politics comes in. And so we can actually unify around, hey, we all care about the environment. We all care about race and racism. We all care about, now how you go about that, we'll have differences. And that's okay. Yeah. But we all care about the same thing. Like, we cannot be Christian in culture and not care about race. It's essential to the gospel. The division of, the tearing down the dividing wall between Jew, Gentile, which is a race issue, and it becoming one person in the church. Christians should lead the way in the way we do our churches, on diverse churches that are unified around something bigger, and listen to each other and learn from each other. I can't, I'm a preacher, so I'll stop preaching, but how easy that happens, right? But
so will you do,
yeah.
Jeff, will you do a sermon series this year around things that might feel like it's about the election, or how do you approach it at Chase Oaks?
Yeah, so 4 years ago, I did a series called Going There. And we took an issue each week on, we did a week on Christian and politics, where we kind of said, hey, what is our identity as Christians in a culture? And kind of debunked Christian nationalism and some of those traps that we can fall into. An issue on that, an issue on life, issues, which is bigger than abortion. We did one on racism, one on the environment, but looked at it from a biblical lens, and realizing, hey, once you get down to the political stuff of how you address these things, there's room for all kinds of disagreement, and let's learn from each other and listen to each other. But let's just think about it biblically. And so we did that. This year, I'm not going to do a whole series like that. We're doing a series on the sayings of Jesus that are a little shocking. So this year, I'm just doing a 1 week on render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Yeah. But I will talk about, hey, what is Caesar's and what is not? Like, our identity is not Caesar's. Yeah. Our mission and how we think culture changes is not Caesar's. Our unity is not Caesar's. We're all that is Jesus. Yeah. So what do we owe Caesar? Well, we owe Caesar our taxes. We owe our government leaders respect and prayers and positive engagement. But that's about it, and so let's remember whose we are, and because we're part of another kingdom, and our we're not here to save America, but to save Americans and to represent Jesus and be ambassadors, so on. So
Yeah.
that's what we'll address this time, just because we went so deep in it 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's great. So if somebody was interested, one, they can obviously get your book, Rebranding Christianity, which I think would be a great asset to anybody to pick up. And then I think you've even got sermon manuscripts, don't you? That if somebody was interested is it from the series you did 4 years ago?
We do, and some other ones too. So if you email me, which is J Jones, my name is Jeff Jones, jjones@chaseoaks.org, jjones@chaseoaks.org. I'll be happy to send you those manuscripts and if they're helpful. And there's a couple that'll be just on politics and then some on those various issues. And
Yeah. Okay.
one of the things that I hated to see when I wrote the book, one of the research things that I found is in 2020, MIT did a study based on the Facebook leaks that came out in 2021, I think. And they poured through all that. And what they found was essentially the most gullible group of people in America that were preyed on by Eastern European and other troll farms that use social media to do spurious websites and fake news and all that to propagate them. The number one target and the most gullible people were white evangelical Christians.
Really?
And something like 19 out of the top 20 top websites put out by evangelicals were spurious.
Interesting.
And
So, now that you
conspiracy.
say that, how do you even combat that then? How do you change that? How do we
Yeah.
change that?
And so I do think churches like me could easily say, you know what? I don't want to. I just want to reach people for Jesus. I don't want to talk about that stuff. And I think what I've seen over the years is no, we actually have to disciple people in some of those areas.
Yeah.
So that Christians should be nuanced thinkers, not the least nuanced thinkers, especially when it comes to issues like race, because that's a Bible and that's ours. Like that's not just some cultural secular thing, but other issues too. We need to help people think better, and I think people want to. Like I think they wonder why we don't help them because they face it at work and they're asked, and all that kind of thing. So I do think churches like us that are built around reaching people for Jesus, as we disciple them once they become Christians, I do think we have to help them think better so they can represent Jesus better in culture and can unify our churches rather than tear them apart.
Yeah, very good. Well, bottom line, you said radical love and just making sure that we truly are modeling Jesus in a very positive way. So, yeah. So, Jeff, one of the things I appreciate about you, you're a fellow pastor, you're leading well, you've been there long term. You were telling me earlier that you just came out of a capital campaign, so that means you're probably tired and worn out. What do you do real quick to recharge yourself? I know you like to snow ski, so Colorado is a big place for you.
Yeah, I do ski trips on a regular thing, and I just plan them into my calendar no matter what, a year in advance, and that way they just happen. But I'm about to go on a study break in July. I am at the end of a capital campaign season. I am worn out. I've got 4 more weeks here that I'll try to survive, and then I'll do a 5 week study break this year. So 2 of those weeks are study, looking ahead at the year, and then 2.5 of those weeks will be vacation. And because I found that 1 week vacation is not enough for me. The secret is a 2 week vacation. It takes 1 week to wind down and the other week to actually rest.
Exactly.
So that's what I'm
And is
doing
that something you've done? Has that been part of your rhythm for many years?
for about 10 years. And it
Yeah,
was a
that's
game
great.
changer.
That's great.
Yeah.
You know what was funny? I used to always hear people talk about study breaks, and my impression was that meant they were going to go and study for the 5, 6, 7 weeks that they were gone. And so I was like, that doesn't appeal to me at all to go
Yeah.
do that. And then I started talking to people. Like, actually, for a lot of them, it meant I'm just taking a break from study, a study break.
Yeah.
Just
I
away
do a little bit of both, but yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, Jeff, thank you for taking time to talk with us. Appreciate it very much. I
Appreciate
got to ask you because we in Pennsylvania, not everybody loves the Cowboys here, and I should have asked you this before I even am asking you now on this call. Are you a Cowboy fan?
I am a Cowboy fan. I'm more a college football fan. Alabama is my deal.
Okay.
So I'm more college football. But yes, I have become a
Good.
Cowboy.
Okay.
And
Good.
every Cowboy fan in Dallas is pretty disillusioned. we try to hang on, and you're good to win one game in a playoff run, and that's about it. And that's probably as good as it'll get.
Yeah,
But
my
as
son
an
has to
Alabama
remind
guy,
me. Yeah,
Jalen Hurts.
my son
What's
has
that?
to remind me it's been 27, 28 years since
Yeah,
we've done anything. So
it's
yeah,
terrible.
slow
But I'm
going.
a Jalen Hurts fan. So
Okay.
for all you Philadelphia Eagles, Jalen Hurts, an Alabama guy. And I had a nephew that played for Alabama with Jalen Hurts and has tremendous respect for him, and I do too. And
That's good.
you've got a good one there.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they do, which hate to see that. So good.
Yeah.
Jeff, thank you for the time. I appreciate it very much, and I hope you get recharged in your study break and continue to lead well there at Chase Oaks. Very much appreciate you and what you're doing.
Thank you, David. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to the Advantage Podcast with David Ashcraft and for participating in our goal to strengthen and encourage pastors and their churches so more people are introduced to Jesus across Pennsylvania. If you found this helpful, feel free to pass it along. To find out more about the work of The Advantage, visit our website at theadvantage.org.